Dr. Guillotin's chilling new device hangs over Paris like a warning. The penalty for defying revolutionary law and order. Freshly christened with the blood of the king's guards, it will soon put an end to the king himself. By August 1792, with the king deposed and the royal family secluded in the Temple prison, Robespierre and his Jacobins are locked in a battle with the moderates of the Assembly, the Girondins, for control of the national government. And on the streets of Paris, a new political movement takes hold. As a symbol of their rejection of aristocratic tradition, ordinary citizens refuse to wear the knee breeches or culotte of the aristocrats. They call themselves the sans-culottes, those without knee pants.
The sans-culottes considered themselves the true people of France. They were not the poorest of the poor. They tended to be fairly well-off artisans, shopkeepers, people like that. But they were people who at least claimed to work with their hands. Not wearing the breeches, not wearing the culotte for the sans-culotte was simply symbolism of being not an aristocrat, being an ordinary man of the people.
The sans-culottes seize control of Paris's city government, while the Jacobins and Girondins steer the rest of the country from the National Assembly, now called the Convention. The Convention struggles with the command of the beleaguered French army, which is swiftly losing ground to Austria and Prussia. While fighting back incursions at the border, the revolutionary government cracks down on enemies within, royalist traitors who might deliver Paris into the hands of the invaders. More than 1,000 people are arrested and herded into prison. Priests, journalists, ordinary men and women. Robespierre concentrates on the internal crisis. But his friend, the Minister of Justice, Georges Danton, motivates men young and old to join the war on the frontier. He is gregarious and loud, everything that Robespierre is not. Soon, Danton's name is heard throughout Paris.
Danton is a bigger-than-life character, a man full of life, full of bombast, tremendous drinker and debaucherer, who, though he's from the educated classes himself, is a guy who, unlike Robespierre, can physically identify with the working people in a way that Robespierre simply cannot.
As the enemy closes in, Danton's fiery rhetoric mobilizes the people, inspiring many to take to the battlefront.
At one of the moments of greatest peril for the revolution, the Austrian and Prussian armies are invading. He gets up in front of the people of Paris and shouts, "De l'audace, encore de l'audace, toujours de l'audace, et la patrie est sauvée." Boldness, more boldness, forever boldness, and the fatherland is saved. He's really one of the people who manages to rally the country against the invader. It's an extraordinary moment.
With so many able-bodied men leaving for the front, Paris is left defenseless, its jails bursting with political prisoners. An unsettling fear floods the city. The growing mass of prisoners may be impossible to contain. Marat puts out a bloodthirsty call for revolutionary citizens to descend upon the prisons and slaughter all inside.
The foreign armies were advancing on Paris. Had they linked up in Paris with these bitter enemies of the revolutions in the prisons, of course, then the results would have been fairly horrific from the standpoint of the people.
In the first week of September, disastrous news arrives from the front. Prussia has taken Verdun, a town on the road to Paris. The enemy is now just miles away. The fear gripping Paris explodes. The sans-culottes break into the prisons and unleash a furious assault on the city's inmates. They will leave no traitor alive.
And the sans-culottes went to the prisons, particularly the prisons where refractory priests were being held, where nobles were being held, where political prisoners were being held, and they started carrying out their own impromptu trials that were very short and that very often simply ended with slaughter.
Women are raped and brutalized, priests disemboweled, aristocrats hacked to pieces. In a primeval slaughter, more than 1,600 are left dead in a matter of days. When word of the September massacres spreads throughout Europe, enemies of the revolution are sickened. Across the English Channel, the London Times gives voice to the revulsion.
Are these the rights of man? Is this the liberty of human nature? The most savage, four-footed tyrants that range unexplored Africa rise superior to these two-legged Parisian animals.
The revolution has taken an inalterable turn. Even Robespierre understands that things have gone too far, that the people cannot manage the revolution on their own. They need guidance, an iron hand. And with the power of his words, the incorruptible rises to the forefront as the man who will guide the revolution. Robespierre had once pushed for a constitutional monarchy. Now he believes there is no longer room for the king. A momentous decision is made. France will put its own king on trial. With the verdict a foregone conclusion, the only debate left is punishment. The moderates, the Girondins, call for sparing Louis's life, which isolates them in the convention.
The Gironde really crystallized as a faction in the convention over the debate over the king, because while they certainly wanted a republic, they were less sure that the king should actually have to die.
But the Girondins are outnumbered by the Jacobin call for blood.
Why did the Jacobins want to kill the king? I think they wanted to kill the king because, as Robespierre brilliantly said, you have to kill the king so the revolution can live. If the king is right, then the revolution is wrong.
In any system there had ever been, there's only one penalty for treason, and that is death. So in this sense, if the king is guilty of betraying the country in a time of war, then the argument is that he must suffer the death of a traitor.
On January 20th, 1793, Louis XVI is declared guilty. The sentence is read. The king must die. That evening, Louis is briefly reunited with his family. Calm in the face of their tears, he promises to return the next morning to say a final goodbye. He will not. He cannot bear his family's anguish and must not weaken on the way to the guillotine. The next morning, a closed carriage brings Louis to the scaffold. And he stoically makes his way to the blade. He attempts to give a speech.
I trust that my death will be for the happiness of my people, but I grieve for France, and I fear that she may suffer the anger of the Lord.
But the guards drown him out with a drum roll. At 10:22 a.m., the man who once was king is no more. In the Temple prison, Marie hears the cannons fire, heralding the death of her husband. She collapses in despair. The king's blood is spilt, the revolutionaries victorious. But the enemies of the revolution will soon claim a victory of their own. Their target? The man who is calling for so many heads to roll, Jean-Paul Marat.